Hello, good morning, CLC students. This is your instructor, Carolyn. I'm going to review a couple of things with you from chapters 8 and 9 of our Introduction to Psychology class. So, let me share my screen with you so we can get started on looking at the lecture notes for chapter 8. So, chapter 8, as you know, is all about personality. And let's see if the slideshow started. So I linked here a crash course personality video on all the different topics of personality. It's just a fun, interesting little video. So when you're tired of listening to me and you still want to study a little bit more, you can listen to that guy. He's pretty good. All right, so definition of personality is a person's enduring patterns of feeling, thinking, and behaving. Something important to note about personality is that sometimes we think, oh, well, I act differently in different situations. Well, actually, your personality is pretty stable over time, and it's what we say here, enduring. You know, it doesn't change too much. Can it change slightly in certain situations? Of course. For the most part, it stays stable over time. Okay, so again, pattern of enduring, distinctive feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. So all of those things that make you who you are is what your personality is made of. And all of those things help you adapt in the world. We're going to talk about a couple different theories of personality. First is Freud. We're going to talk about Freud in all of his fun elements, including psychodynamic approach to personality. So he really was the one who developed this iceberg concept. He said we have this unconscious mind, which is, if you think about an iceberg, the layer below, so if this is the water, this is the iceberg that lays below the water, kind of like if you have an ice cube. I have an ice cube in a glass right now, and that's here. I have an ice cube in my glass, and if you can see, the ice cube is a little bit on top of the water and a little bit below the water. So when you think about the unconscious mind, that's the part that's below the water, the part that there we can sort of see it, but not really. So that's where Freud said your memories and your awareness of the world, it's there, but we can't access it on a regular basis in a typical way. Moved on to the preconscious mind. Those are thoughts just below the surface. He called it something else. We can access some of that stuff. And then there's the conscious mind. That's thoughts you're aware of. So the big ice cube, the big iceberg on top, that's actually what you can think of. That's stuff that you're aware of, you're processing, etc. So when you think about the id, that's the stuff that's below the surface of the iceberg. So that's the stuff below the water. Those are your primitive impulses, your unconscious. That's the stuff that says, I want to eat pancakes, and you decide to have a whole stack of pancakes because you love pancakes and you want to eat pancakes all day long. So it's a primitive impulse, not typically something you would choose to do in a responsible way. It operates off the pleasure principle of, I'm going to do what I want to do when I want to do it. The ego comes in, and the ego's like, wait a minute, maybe you should weigh things. Maybe you can have pancakes, but maybe you don't have all the pancakes. Maybe you have just 5 or 6 pancakes, depending on how big they are. You probably don't need to eat 15 pancakes or however many he has stacked up there. And the reality principle is based on the ego. Moving right along to superego, this is your unconscious conscience, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Basically, your superego is sort of your guiding ship or your guiding morality, which is basically going to tell you pancakes aren't a very good choice for breakfast. They have no protein. They're not going to keep you very full today. So if you really, really want to eat the pancakes, I guess you could have one. But make sure you also eat a lot of eggs and a lot of fruit and vegetables and other things that are more healthy for you. So that's what your unconscious is telling you to do. It gives you morality, not just about pancakes, but about other things in the world, about right and wrong, things that are against the law, and choices you make to break or not break those concepts. This is just a fun little activity. The answers are in the notes section. Make sure you take it. It's kind of fun. All right, moving along to Freud's other things about personality. So he developed these psychosexual stages, very odd to most people. The important thing here is that Freud was the first one to sort of talk about the unconscious mind, and so because of that, we still listen to what Freud has to say. So this is why Freud's here. So he basically said babies 0 to 18 months old, they operate from the pleasure principle of oral stimulation. So because they put everything in their mouth when they're babies, That's what he dubbed the oral stage. 18 months to 3 years old, that's what he dubbed the anal stage. And so it's all about potty training. It's all about getting rid of whatever is in our body. And he basically said if people don't overcome these stages, they can end up with other things in their life. So for example, if you don't successfully overcome the oral fixation stage, you could end up as a smoker or someone who constantly eats because you're never satisfied with whatever is going in your mouth, you need more and more. Same thing with anal stage. If you've heard the term anal retentive, that's the concept that people are very organized and can't stand to have anything out of place. So Freud basically said, you weren't potty trained the right way, and therefore you have all these issues around having your life to be organized and can't let things go. Felix stage, this is all about little kids who try to figure out what sex is. He had this whole theory of Oedipus and Electra complex and basically said little boys to be about 5 or 6 years old and tell their dad, you can't be married to mommy anymore because I'm going to be married to mommy. And the theory is the little boy has intentions to kill his father because he wants to marry his mother. And Electra complex is the same thing for little girls who feel the same way about their mom versus their dad. It's more Greek mythology and Shakespearean drama. It's rooted in that than any kind of true outcomes in real life. Freud brought it up. The latency phase has to do with basically kids from the time they're 6 years old to puberty, what is going on in terms of sex and attraction and things like that. He's like, yeah, they're just kind of being kids. Then adult stage, it's all about pleasure and having sex with other adults and developing your sexual life as a healthy adult. You can play that little game. Answers are in the notes. Defense mechanisms. So Freud said that when we don't want to know the truth or want to tell the truth, we tend to put up these walls or create these defense mechanisms. It's this unconscious way that we defend against our anxiety. You do this all the time. You probably don't even realize you've done it, and you don't know that there's names associated with some of these. So, for example, repression. This is forgetting what kind of happened to you, especially if it's traumatic. So we see repression as a common defense mechanism against traumatic childhood experiences. And this doesn't have to be the really big stuff. It commonly is big stuff like sexual assault, rape, number of other things. But it can also be child abuse. It can be things like emotional abuse, that you've repressed things that you don't remember until way later when you're an adult. Excuse me. All right. It can also be something simple like a mistake that you made and you forget about it. Regression. This is when you revert to an earlier behavior pattern. So someone who's been abused or someone who finds something to be very challenging or difficult, sometimes they regress and they go into patterns where they act like they did when they were a kid. So for example, going back to the bottle under stress. Freud said, basically, kids who haven't finished oral stage of fixation, they may actually become drinkers or heavy alcoholics when they get older because they remember having pleasure the last time when they drank from the bottle of milk. So now they are adults, and so they regress to that same behavior, but they might actually not be drinking milk, they're drinking alcohol. Displacement. This is where you default impulses to a safer target. So you probably can't yell at your boss without losing your job. So instead of yelling at your boss, you yell at your spouse. You're so angry from work, you're pretty tense, you instead yell at your significant other instead of yelling at your boss. Some people, especially kids, sometimes they can't yell at their parents or their siblings, and so they sometimes kick a dog instead of telling their sibling or telling their teacher why they're upset. Okay, sublimation. Sometimes it's acceptable to write a book about a topic that's socially acceptable, and writing a book that's more like 50 Shades of Grey, where it's really socially unacceptable. So that's sublimation. Rationalization is when you justify explanations. I deserve expensive desserts because I studied hard. That would be a rationalization. We do this all the time. I'm sure there's a lot of rationalization going on with people stuck in quarantine and stuck at home a lot. I deserve this extra treat. We talk about the COVID-19 pounds that are happening, right? So, people are going to rationalize all sorts of behavior. Projection, attribute your impulses to others. So for example, if you keep starting fights, but I'm the one who really starts them, right? And projection can also be, I think you're really mad at this situation. If you're manipulating this relationship in order to fix whatever you got going on over there. So basically, you're not dealing with reality. Instead, you're dealing with what you think you can control or manipulate. It's a defense mechanism. Take a look at some of the Frozen clips and movie clips. They're very funny, kind of iterations of what defense mechanisms look like. So psychologists took some premises from Freud and they built upon them. Basically, these three psychologists said, hey, Freud, we see what you're doing over there with all of your sex stuff and all of your defense mechanism stuff, and we're going to see it and move it to the next level so that people take psychology seriously. So Adler came along. Adler, by the way, has a very famous school in Chicago called the Adler School of Psychology. If you're ever interested in getting a master's degree or a PhD in psych, great school to check out. All right, so Adler came along and said people are motivated by purposes. He talked about birth order, about how like oldest kids are more responsible and youngest kids tend to be a little bit more on the party side. There's really no basis of research that holds that up, but it still seems to come up more and more. All right, Jung came along. So Carl Jung, that's how you say his name, is Jung, not Jung, it's Jung. And he basically said that we operate with this collective unconscious. So he said there's this unconscious mind that we have, because remember Freud talked about the unconscious mind as being that part that's below the iceberg. That's your id. But Jung took it to a bigger level. And so Jung said, actually, we all share this unconscious collective mind. It's a little deep, it's a little on the philosophy side, just hang with me. He basically said we all historically and environmentally share this same consciousness, unconsciousness. He said because of that, we have these archetypes, which are these big ideas and images that have rich and symbolic meaning. So for example, have you ever met someone that is very similar to someone else that you've met? It's like a teacher figure or a priest or a religious figure of some kind. Sorry, my voice is weird. I just woke up. So Jung basically said there's archetypes and they basically are similar people in your life. They come and go throughout your life. This is where the 16 personalities comes through, is because Jung and others believe that we can pretty much categorize people into these 16 different types of personalities. It is what it is. Karen Horney came along. I like Karen Horney, number one, because she's one of the few prominent female psychologists who came along and basically refuted Freud and said, yeah, Freud, you have nice ideas, but really we can't research them, and so we can't observe any data about the unconscious mind that you're talking about that's below the surface. How can you even prove that? That's just your idea. And so basically she came along and said, we need a little bit more to this than what you have to say. So she took the sociocultural approach and said, gender is highly important because, women envy the status bestowed by men because men in our country and in our societies around the world typically have higher social status. They typically have more power than a woman. And she said, and men, on the other hand, envy reproductive capabilities of women. Men want to have babies and things like that. So it wasn't so much that Horney was right. Horney was right. And she actually was proven wrong later on. The point is that Karen Horney stood up to Freud and said, hey, you can't just lump everybody together in one big pile. Men and women are different, as well as you have to be able to research this and actually prove the differences. So that's what that's about. Okay. Read that on your own. All right, humanistic psychology. This is Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. Carl Rogers, so that's what he looks like there. Think of Carl Rogers as Mr. Rogers or Fred Rogers from the children's television show. We'll get to that later. But in your mind, just think about Carl Rogers and Mr. Rogers as similar. Remember for the test. Abraham Maslow invented this thing called the Maslow hierarchy of needs, which is a hierarchy that basically says everybody has the same sorts of needs. Between these two guys, they helped create humanistic psychology. So basically they said, let's stop thinking about people as having problems or there's something wrong with them in the world. Let's stop calling them patients. And let's start calling them clients, just referring to them as people. So that was a huge shift in the world of psychotherapy, was because Rogers and Maslow decided that people were not, schizophrenic, or people weren't bipolar. People were people first who happened to have a medical issue or happened to have a psychiatric disorder. So that was sort of the shift between the two. So concepts about who we are, self-esteem is important. Maslow created the self-actualization hierarchy. I told you that he's got this hierarchy. He basically said self-actualization is the highest you can achieve. Carl Rogers, like I said before, he's all about the client or person-centered therapy, unconditioned positive regard. He really, truly believed that people should be treated with the utmost respect no matter who they are. So no matter if the head of the CEO of Walgreens or the person who the homeless person off the street walks into the therapy room, both get treated with equal respect and unconditional positive regard. Carl also did a non-direct approach. See, there's Mr. Rogers. The idea is that people are worth something, that we need to have healthy relationships with people. If we just give each other empathy, we'll be good to go. Here's the Maslow hierarchy of needs that I mentioned earlier. Again, self-actualization is at the top, etc. All right, there's Bandura. He came along and said, hey, the personality is actually partly due to the person, the behavior, and the environment. So that developed the traits concept of, are we a matter of our traits or are we a matter of our state? So in other words, is the situation going to determine how we act in a situation, or is the trait that we have going to determine it? So there's the MBTI, which is linked there. MBTI is tough. It's a tough thing for me because it gets used a lot in career counseling. And so because that's my profession as a full-time practitioner, MBTI has been around for over 50 years. And so sometimes people think that when a test has been around for so long, that it actually has a lot of reliability and validity and things like that, things that we look for in a test. Does the test measure what it's said to measure? MBTI has gone back and forth on this. I've done a lot of research on this particular one. It's good in some areas and not so great in others. Does it get the job done and accomplish what it needs to accomplish? Yes. So is it about as good and as reliable as a test in a magazine to talk about your personality? Mm-hmm. Does it get the job done? So MBTI basically said there are these, 16 different types of personality. You can see here that there's these different categories. You must know my MBTI score, and I just took this last week, so it's fresh, is I am an I, means I'm an introvert, which most people are surprised to hear that when they find out I'm a teacher. Actually, when I'm not in front of a classroom, I'm very introverted. I'm an I, then I'm an S, which is a sensor, and then there is more of the thinkers versus feelers. And then there's thinkers versus feelers, which tend to be more on the feeling side. I'm sure that's pretty obvious. And then judges versus perceivers. So I tend to be more of a J. Lately, I've learned that I really want to be a P. So I'm a J trapped in the body of a wannabe P. So there you go. There's my MBTI code. You can look it up and see all the different things about me. But the idea is that, when you take this to the career level, that there has been research done that kind of integrates, so someone who's an ISFJ, what kind of careers do they typically have and what career could be a good fit for them? We'll be shocked to learn that career counselor is number 2 on the list of careers for ISFJs. I'm a career counselor. Okay. Problems with the trait model. Traits are these enduring characteristics. States are more brief or temporary experiences. So, this is the hard part. Traits are long-term, right? I have always been an introvert. I just have. So it's just been part of who I am. But in a state of a classroom, I can actually have a brief moment of being an extrovert. That's the difference. So, states and traits are a little tricky. So trait is something I will carry with me forever. The state of how I engage with the world, different situations can change that. So that's what that's about. We tend to think that traits are pretty stable in other people. Like if you met me outside of the classroom, if you saw me at the store, or you saw me at a show or something like that, you would be surprised to see that I'm very introverted. I really rarely talk about my feelings or thoughts outside of people that I trust. So tend to see more situational things in ourselves. We see stable traits in other people. All right, big five. So big five are these 5 personality factors. So this is, again, a totally different personality theory, but basically the big 5 model says that 5 underlying trait dimensions. Basically what they did was they meaning researchers, not just they in general, took a big board, and if we were in class right now, I would be working with you on the big whiteboard, and I would say, tell me some things that are personality traits of people that you know and love, and then also people that you hate. We would come up with all these words like generous and kind and leader and angry and difficult and things like that. And we would start to group them together. So basically these researchers took thousands of different types of traits of personalities and then basically grouped them all together and got it down to 5 different types of personality. And so these types tend to stay stable over time, explains population behaviors, etc. The most validated one, the acronym is OCEAN or CANOE, whichever you prefer. Again, back to the water metaphor. So what do the letters stand for? So there they are. So openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These are all on a continuum. So openness might be here, and then on the other end of openness continuum might be something like closed or closed off. So we're going to go through each of these very quickly because they're pretty self-explanatory, but I encourage you to take a deep dive into them. So openness is just you're very open to ideas, open to different concepts. If I tell you, hey, what kind of job do you want to choose? You could be anywhere from medical assistant to doctor to nurse to, well, maybe I want to go outside the medical field and I want to do something in graphic design. You're just really open to the whole concept. People who are high in this category tend to have unusual ideas, tend to be very creative. These are lots of artists, lots of people who are interested in things that are different. Might be athletes who are interested in really high dangerous sports like downhill skiing or something like that. Lower in openness tend to be less creative, not very curious. They're kind of just like, just take a job, please, and whatever works is fine with me. Whatever's going to pay my bills is fine. And they typically don't have much flexibility in their life. Conscientiousness is people who are hardworking, ambitious, energetic. People who in our country say, just work hard and get a college degree, it'll pay off later. They tend to persevere no matter what, they get down to it. People who are low in conscientiousness actually have, these are people who have lots of goals, no actual tangible things working towards those goals. They tend to make a list of a lot of things to do, but they don't actually cross off the list very often. They tend to be irresponsible and disorganized and things like that. All right, extroversion is pretty commonly understood as things like this, warm, gregarious, pretty assertive. A great way to determine extroversion versus introversion is extroverts tend to gather their energy from being around other people. Introverts tend to gather their energy by being alone. So people who are in quarantine right now who are extroverts are going absolutely crazy because they have no one they can talk to, no people they can go see, no people they can be with. They're just all by themselves. And this is a very difficult situation for people who are extroverts. This is a great example of extrovert versus introvert. So the extrovert's like, I'm staying in tonight. Introvert's like, I'm staying in tonight. They both say the same thing, but obviously the introvert is far more happy about the idea. Extroverts tend to be good at all of these things, and introverts tend to be good at all of these things. They tend to just want to stay home and watch Netflix and stay close to their family. It's not that they want to be completely alone and crawl under a rock, but they really just want to keep things simple and be quiet because introverts cannot interact with the world unless they have renewed their energy on their own with themselves first. Okay, agreeableness. Agreeableness people, are not all of these things. Instead, agreeableness tends to be people who are, they want to collaborate with other people. They're the first ones who say, oh, that sounds like an interesting idea. I'd really like to work with you on that. They're the people who say, no, I didn't think of it that way. You're probably right. I think that we should go around the topic this way. That's typically people who are agreeable, people who just kind of go with the flow and just do the thing. And they collaborate with other people. Neurotic people. These are the people who tend to have high anxiety, very hostile, self-conscious. Also might be, I always try to think of my mom sometimes with neuroticism because she's so, what's the word? She's a hypochondriac. She's going to the doctor all the time for the smallest little things. That's someone who's neurotic. She always thinks she's dying of something. They tend to suffer from all of these other things as well. Here's a fun quiz for you. I'll leave the answers in the notes section of the PowerPoint lecture notes. Okay, and then personality tends to be stable. Again, when we average people over time, can you be open now as an adult, but you really weren't very open as a kid? Absolutely. You probably did have some openness traits about you from when you were a kid that you don't really even remember now that you're an adult. Okay, so a personality test. So objective test. This is like the MMPI. MMPI is the Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory, which is a series of about 500 true and false questions. Think about that for a second. 500 true and false questions. I've taken it twice. It is not pleasant to take. It keeps asking you questions over and over to make sure that you're giving the right answer. Projective tests, on the other hand, ask for meaning from ambiguous stimuli. So like the thing in the lower right-hand corner, the ink blot test, that's like a Rorschach test, and that's a projective test. We basically ask people, can you explain what you see in this ink blot? If someone looks at that and says, well, I kind of see like a bug or a butterfly, that's a pretty common answer. So I wouldn't be too worried about their personality. If someone looks at that and says, well, I see a possum split open and their bloods are spilling out, and that's like the animal that I just killed last night, I've got some concerns. I'm going to be wanting to dig a little deeper into that as a psychologist and ask them more questions about, hey, tell me what else you see and why you think that. A thematic appreciation test or a TAT asks people to tell stories about pictures that they see. It's another form of testing. Social desirability. So this is sort of important. So people often answer questions to make themselves look better than they actually behave. This is a big problem. So one of the things about personality tests is that oftentimes we build in what's known as a lie scale. So people who are on death row or people who have been arrested for a heinous crime like murder are often given personality tests and they're told, well, tell me everything you can and things like that. So they take a test like the MMPI, or they take a test like the Rorschach, right? So someone who is a complete murderer, someone who is really, really a horrible person, they try to make themselves look like are actually just a good person. We have something called faking good and faking bad built in as scale on the larger test so that people can't lie. They seriously can't lie. When I plot out tests and things like that, we can tell if someone's trying to lie. And so people will tend to tell us things that are more socially desirable than what is actually true. If the test doesn't, and most of the tests don't have these lie scales built in, if it does, you can catch them, which means they get to take the test, those 500 true false questions all over again. We make them take it again and again. So again, like I said, MMPI, most widely used test. It predicts outcomes, and these outcomes are identified with their traits. Here's what I was trying to talk about. So over here on this part here, the first three scales of the MMPI, when we see that the graph goes up and down like a little mountain, we know that they're telling the truth. See this one marked L? That stands for lie. F stands for faking. I don't remember what K stands for. Basically, those three things right there, they're in a different pattern, and we know that someone has lied on the test. The other pieces here, do you see how there's like a line here and a line here? Anything that falls on the scatter plot that's within this range here is all considered normal. When something spikes like this on scale number 6, which is marked PA, paranoia. So this is someone who's pretty paranoid, and it looks like also their scale for this one and this one, scales 8 and 9 are also highlighted. So there's some schizophrenia going on there. So this is someone who's a paranoid schizophrenic. We know that they told the truth because their lie scale looked like this. So this is how you interpret an MMPI personality test that can give us all sorts of information about who they are and what kind of issues they might be going through. Rorschach I mentioned earlier, and ink blots, we asked them to describe them. This is a terrible test in terms of reliability and validity because we can't validate it. We can't determine this is truly, someone who's schizophrenic because they told me that that one was a picture of a possum that was splattered open. The next person who's schizophrenic might tell me that same picture is a picture of their grandmother. There's no rhyme or reason for the test. It's more up to interpretation. And then the TAT is designed to elicit stories that reveal personality. So that one has a little bit higher reliability and validity. We tend to show a picture to a person and say, tell me a story about the situation that you think might be going on in this picture. Then they're able to talk about it. There's the Rorschach again. There's just a different picture. And here's the thematic appreciation test. So we would ask people, tell me a story about this picture. And they might say, well, it looks like 2 women, or it looks like a man and a woman, or it looks like an old woman who's a ghost. They talk about things like that. If someone were to tell me, well, this is a story about my great Aunt Hilda, who was a witch who burned people at the stake, I have some concerns, just being honest. All right, we're going to skip over behavior genetics. Read about that. Genes are important. It's not destiny. It's all about the nature and nurture, of course. All right, and there is chapter 8, my friends. Stay tuned. Chapter 9.